Hello. No idea if anyone's here. Doesn't look like it. See if anyone twigs. I like being sneaky with my lives. Quick little bite-sized lives. Say hello if anyone's there. Hello, Victoria. Oh, there's actually 5. Laurel. Laurel, you're always here. It's fantastic. Anybody else? 9. I do still need to have my intro thing. So it's, again, a nice little, hopefully nice anyway, Aucademy bite size. I was made aware by a number of people that my bite size last week wasn't very bite sized because it was about 45 minutes long. So I am trying to make them smaller. So basically what I'm trying to do is take some of the key sort of lessons that I will deliver in training and do them in little tiny bite-sized segments. But last week's was autism, the abstract idea of it anyway, in the diagnostic manuals and so on, in comparison to the more nuanced autistic experience, which is very varied and more humanizing than the way autism is portrayed in the diagnostic manuals and so on. Hello, Ellie, or Eli, sorry, Catherine. Hello, lovely people. So yeah, today I'm carrying on. It's definitely hopefully going to be shorter than the one that I did last week. So just a reminder that we are on tonight as well from 7 p.m. We have the fantastic Jodie Izzet from Nurturing Autism, Nurturing PDA and Autism with Love. So she's got lots of platforms to support people in terms of those different profiles. So we're going to be talking about what is pathological, in quotation marks, demand avoidance, and what does that profile mean when the autistic person also has that demand avoidant profile? How is it different, and how might we support those young people and adults when they have that different profile? So we're doing that tonight with Tigger, because Tigger also is quite knowledgeable on the PDA profile and does training on that. So that's what we're doing tonight. So like I say, and now I'm going to do a little bite size on the spectrum, really, because the spectrum, the idea of the spectrum, I feel we've lost what it actually meant, if there is ever a clear understanding of what the spectrum was meant to represent in terms of autistic experience. So what is the spectrum really, and about how everyone has challenges and strengths. And so actually this, again, like I say, all feeds on from the talk that I did last week on the bite size, what is autism versus autistic experience. Usually in training, I then go on to explain how there's a number of myths that we have in society, a lot to do with non-autistic researchers, theorists and diagnosticians and so on. And that then gets sort of fed into wider societal narratives. And actually we end up losing completely what the meaning of things like the word spectrum were actually meant to represent. So like I say, hopefully all of these things feed on from one another. So let's get on with the Aucademy bite size. So typically if I'm doing training, let me just make my slides a bit bigger for you. Don't need to see me quite as big. There we go. So typically when I deliver training, I will ask, particularly if there's the majority are non-autistic, so neurotypical professionals or teachers or parents and so on, I will ask them to imagine the spectrum, the autistic spectrum. What do they think that looks like? And typically what they will think of is actually not a spectrum at all. So what they typically think of is this. So what they see or what they imagine is, this is technically a spectrum because of the color gradient. Okay, so you've got the color differences there, but it's actually used inappropriately as a binary continuum. So this idea that at one end, and I know I've done this already, we did this last week, but at one end of that line, you have this so-called thing of severe autism in quotation marks, and at the other end, this idea of high functioning autism or less severe in quotation marks, all in quotation marks, because obviously this language is very, very problematic. And I will be doing a bite size on the issue of functioning language. So the problem with this, obviously, is that it doesn't allow for that individual to change, and it plonks all autistic people down on that line somewhere as if they don't move. So I did talk about this in my much longer talk that I did last week, which was, like I say, 45 minutes long. So the issue, obviously, with that, like I say, doesn't allow for change, doesn't allow for people to develop and grow, for their, support needs to change, for their environment to change, to actually ameliorate the challenges in their environment and mean that they're not struggling or as distressed. So we talked about this last week, and we talked about how actually what we should consider is the spiky profile of the individual. We talked about, as I can see Sai here in the comment section, instead of seeing that as a binary continuum line, it's actually well, it can be sparkly as well, but it's a rainbow sausage where an individual autistic person is born on one end and they die at the other end, and they do lots of living in the middle. And so that you can take a snapshot of that person's life at any point and have a look at their profile and see what things in the environment are making them struggle, and then actually look at, okay, those are the things that make them struggle. Let's change that environment. Let's change those things. Maybe they need better support in terms of just day-to-day living, having somebody else do some of the or all of the cooking and cleaning and so on, so that they can actually be less challenged by their environment. And then also, once you've done that one, you start to really support those challenges in the environment for that autistic person. You can then focus on their strengths, and those are individual strengths. So it's really important to not assume or make or place expectations onto somebody. That's not the same as a sort of supporting the individual's personal strengths. So when people talk about somebody's potential, that's kind of frustrating, because they don't talk really about an individual person's potential. What they're talking about is an expectation of what they would like for that person to be able to do. So when somebody will say, oh, we're really trying to help this student or this pupil reach their their truest potential to be able to I don't know, go to college or learn to drive or something along these lines, that's actually not talking about an individual's potential. That's a hope and an expectation of what you'd like that person to be able to do. So when we're talking about an individual's strengths and their personal potential, that is very individual. It's very personal to the person. So just like I say, focusing on an individual's strengths once you've supported and ameliorated the challenges, which might be ongoing in the environment. So it's important to remember that every single human being has challenges and strengths. And the reason that I really did try to hammer home for 45 minutes last week on the difference, the nuance between this abstract idea of autism and the more realistic autistic experience, which is very variable and varied and more humanizing as well. And the reason I focus on, or I talked about that so much last week, is because the manuals really are like the diagnostic manuals, the diagnoses themselves and so on. The way society understands autism at present is all based on challenges. It's all based on struggling and deficit, disorder and so on. It's not to say that as autistic people we don't struggle. We do, and we actually should all be quite aware or become or learn about the politics of our lives, because we are very much a minority that does struggle in society because of the barriers that are placed there in the systems. It's a neurotypical system, and it's not really suited for our neurologies, but it doesn't mean that inherently we are born to struggle. And so actually it's important that we acknowledge all human beings have challenges and strengths. Kind of gone off on a weird tangent there. So really importantly, as Luke Bearden explains, it is autism plus the environment that gives you an outcome. Okay, so to have a struggling autistic person means that there are autistic neurology, plus the environment we are in, which might not be supporting us. It might be really damaging for us and creating these extreme barriers and challenges that will produce the outcome. So autism plus the environment might equal a struggling, distressed, autistic person. Okay, but it is not inherent to being autistic that we should be struggling. Okay, so that's Luke Beardham at the University of Sheffield. Nice cheesy quote to try and help people understand this as well. So when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. And the reason this cheesy quote is really important is because far too much sort of intervention in relation to autistic experience focuses on trying to change an autistic person's neurology. Now, to some extent, human brains are test in the comment section. Hi, Samara. I've gone off on a tangent and I'm ignoring the comment section. That's probably why. So to a large extent, human brains are what's known as plastic, okay, that they're moldable, right, by experience and so on and so forth, okay, which always sounds to me, plastic I always think of as quite rigid. So but what it means is moldable to some extent. So while human brains are relatively plastic, they still have their own parameters. Okay, so if you're autistic, trying to change that person's neurology is nigh on impossible and actually very, very damaging. We've got evidence that's mounting that trying to change autistic people, whether that's via a so-called official, in quotation marks, intervention, like applied behavioural analysis or anything that's based on reward and punishment of our behaviour, because behaviour is only the outward expression of a neurological profile, anything like there's evidence mounting that damages us. It increases the rates of complex PTSD and PTSD itself. It also means that we're probably hiding our autistic selves as opposed to being basically we become much more capable, I guess, or can become capable of hiding our autistic selves. That's not the same as not being autistic. So when people feel that potentially those sorts of interventions are treating autism or changing the autistic person, they're not really, they're just hiding the autistic self. And so sadly we see an increase likelihood that if you mask, for instance, if you are made to feel that you as a person are broken or faulty, that we're more likely then to experience suicidality. So suicide is sadly quite high within the autistic community. So trying to actually change autistic neurology is really not the go-to. That shouldn't be something that we should be trying to do or focusing on, because actually, while people might argue, oh yeah, but we can't change the world around you, and it's kind of like, but that's actually easier than trying to change inherent neurology. So actually change the environment would probably work much easier. Well, not potentially easier, but it's certainly less challenging than trying to change actual autistic neurology. So we should be focusing on the environment. So this is a nice infographic from the Leeds University. I've got it. It does have the credit on the next slide, just to make sure that everyone knows. I always try to credit everywhere, wherever the work's coming from. But it's just because the picture is quite long and I wanted you to be able to see it, so I've cut it in half here. And this is nice. So it's from their student support services at the Leeds University, and they're just trying to demonstrate that it's really important to also acknowledge the strengths that autistic people may have. But I always want to caveat this as well with, it's really important though to acknowledge the balance that yes, we will be challenged by our environment and struggle in some ways, in some capacities, whilst also recognizing that we do have strengths, but also importantly that we're allowed to be bog standard and average. Okay, because there's plenty of non-autistic people who are bog standard and average, in terms of their own abilities and strengths. And importantly, we shouldn't be placing our value as human beings on being all shiny superheroes with superpowers. Autism superpowers is a very problematic, in quotation marks, superpowers. This idea is it's a very problematic narrative. So we don't want to go from a wholly deficit model where we're just broken, etc., to a wholly we're superheroes with superpowers model. That's not balance. We want balance. So like I say, importantly, yes, you might have your own personal strengths, and they may be absolutely anything, and there's no strength that's too small. Okay, so you don't have to have these grand ideas about what a strength should look like. It's personal to the individual, but like I say, it's also, we are allowed to be bog standard, to be valued as human beings in society. But it still is nice to see the potential strengths that we might not have thought about, or the ways that we can reframe what are sometimes considered as these sorts of problems or challenges in quotation marks. So our methodical approaches, so maybe as an autistic person, you have a methodical approach. I certainly do. Lots of us have very deep focus on our dedicated interests, the things that really interest us. Some of us are really creative, you know. Annette Foster, sorry, as soon as I say Annette, if you're not used to us yet, we always call out Annette. I did try and explain that on the live last week as well with Kieran, I think, when Annette did an impromptu appearance on the live. Now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, so Annette's a very different autistic person to me. So I'm very methodical. I'm very much about writing about theories and, doing these kinds of things. Annette she is an academic, but she's also very creative. So she's a performance artist and, this kind of thing. So she's a very different autistic person to me. And now I can see lots of lovely people in the comment section just capitalizing Annette. So you can see that, yes, some of us may have some of these strengths. Some of us may have different types of strengths as well. This is the second half of that infographic by the University of Leeds. So like I said, I'm not going through these. It's just some examples of potential strengths that we may or may not have. And importantly, when I do training as well, I like to try and make it clear that particularly to people who aren't used to this more balanced idea of autistic people having both challenges and strengths, and just they're always focusing far too much on the challenges, for instance, that person might experience. So I try to demonstrate that, yes, I understand that it's all very well seeing me as an autistic person and then being potentially frustrated or even just dismissive because I'm able to articulate myself, I'm, delivering a talk and training and also all kinds of things. So I like to also explain my own personal challenges as well, because then I think that's important to see the balance for all autistic people. So some of mine are social difficulties with non-autistic people. So that's a very important qualification or caveat there. So social difficulties, understanding non-autistic people. I, relatively speaking, do understand and can pick up behaviours and so on, but it's more that reciprocal social interaction with non-autistic people that I struggle with. I always struggled to make friends until I realised I was autistic, and then found other autistic people. I get frustrated about having to explain why I don't make eye contact. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to mask. So trying to explain that can get frustrating. Although most of the people I talk to now are autistic, so I don't necessarily have to explain myself quite as much as I might have to, unless I'm delivering training and I want to explain those things to give examples. I avoid social physical contact, particularly because I'm sensory sensitive and it can be quite distressing for me. I really do struggle with unexpected or unanticipated change. So I'm very distressed at surprises. And if a number of you have watched any of our lives where I've talked about this before, I give the anecdote of my partner telling me for about 3 weeks that I was getting a surprise for my birthday. And it really stressed me out. He knows he's autistic with attention differences himself, and he knows I don't like surprises, but he still doesn't understand how distressing that is for me. And so, yeah, it got to my birthday and he was telling me, we need to leave the house to go and get your present, which I really didn't understand, why is it not here? And then we went out on the street and he was saying, you don't need your car keys, you don't need a coat, we're not going far. And I got even more confused because then my brain has nothing to go on. It couldn't work out, well, what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? It was just getting very frustrating. And he walked across the road to the reptile shop, and then my brain just freaked out because it just went off on all these different tangents and paths of possible outcomes. And that's just too distressing. I didn't want a lizard, I didn't want a frog, definitely didn't want a spider or a snake or anything like that. And so I just had a little mini sort of crying meltdown out on the street as a grown 36-year-old woman, because I was just too stressed at the not knowing. It was my giant African land snail, the first one that I got, which was Cooper, but it was still very distressing. So that, is still a problem, still a challenge for me if it's unanticipated or change that's not under my control. I do have sensory issues, which is why I shave my hair, for instance. Like I say, very tactile averse. So my partner Louis, he's kind of tactile sense seeking, so he would like to make little patterns on my skin, which even when I do that to myself, it's actually distressing. But he knows that he can barely do that for more than a few seconds before I go, oh, no, it feels weird, I don't like it, and things like this. So you can see that the sensory issues can be a challenge as well. Sometimes, but not as often as some autistic people, I do lose the ability to use mouth words. So when I'm very, very overwhelmed and burnt out, I really struggle to get all the thoughts and the words that are definitely there in my head to connect with the mechanics of my mouth. And so I struggle with that sometimes. Not the same as situational mutism, which is more around potentially like social anxiety. This is much more for me like a burnout experience. I still can get overwhelmed and sad and anxious, but I guess my biggest challenges are not understanding how other typically non-autistic people view me. So some of the phrases over my adult lifetime of being told that I come across as cold, unapproachable, standoffish and intimidating always distressed me because it didn't make sense. I didn't understand that because on the inside I felt very, very empathetic for people or concerned for people's well-being. But now that I know I'm autistic and I started looking into sort of my mask, for instance, and my very apparently neutral autistic face, which was discussed in my my assessment documents, it kind of makes sense now. So it's not as distressing, but it's still frustrating that people might get that impression of me that I don't feel I'm putting out there. And sometimes I can be misunderstood and underestimated by non-autistic people, particularly as I come across and appear much younger than my 37 years, which is a bit frustrating still. But importantly, also to talk then about my strengths. So, I mean, I guess looking at that, it's sort of how would I personally or ask people around me to ameliorate those challenges that I might have? I mean, the sensory ones, I did that for myself by shaving my head. So you can see how you can work with your own autistic needs when there's a conflict for your autistic needs, which are being challenged by the environment. You can, to some extent, you might be able to adapt things so that you are less distressed or challenged, i.e. I shaved my hair. There might be other things there. So my loss of mouth words, for instance, I guess in respect to that, it's not letting yourself or hoping that you don't feel bad when that happens, because it's just your body trying to say you've done too much. But it's also, okay, well, why is that happening? Why am I getting burnt out that way? What can I do? Can I reduce my workload? For others, that might be them trying to work out backwards. Okay, what have we been doing? Have we been taking our autistic loved one into too many sensory overwhelming environments? Are we expecting too much of them? Do we need to create a much less demanding or sensory, overwhelming environment to actually prevent that burnout and the loss of mouth words and so on? Also, just respecting that some of us don't use mouth words as autistic people. So do you see what I mean? Trying to work on, okay, how can we adapt the environment and the people around us accommodate for the things that challenge me, and then we can focus on our strengths. So for me, I have a very deep focus and concentration on things that interest me, like many autistic people. Not all, because of the variance, but a lot of us can have very dedicated interests. Mine pretty much is just autistic experience, mental health, stigma reduction, giant African land snails. It's probably about it. So if you wanted to talk to me about something else, I'd be a bit stuck. I'd be interested, but I'll be stuck. I do have great empathy for people and a strong sense of social justice, which is actually quite huge in the autistic population. So that's part of the myth, which is one of the next bite size that I will do, which is on the myths about autistic experience. But part of that is this myth that we lack empathy, when the discussion was that we struggle with cognitive perspective taking, but actually a large number of us, not all, but a large number of us do have quite strong effective emotional empathy. And while some of us might really struggle due to alexithymia, so a difficulty or difference understanding, recognizing or articulating emotions and feelings. So while we might struggle with what are classed as basic emotions in quotation marks, happiness, sadness, a lot of us have what's known as grand emotions, such as justice. Some of us really, really are have such a strong sense of justice. Oh, there's lots of lovely long comments. I'll come back to those in a minute. I came away from them so I didn't get distracted. So I'll come back to those in a minute. I very much do say what I mean and mean what I say. Sometimes that can get me in trouble, but actually that's just how I communicate. And I very, very much appreciate meeting autistic people and having autistic friends and so on, or people, you know, autistic people in our social groups and so on, who are very direct and to the point, and they are so used to being told that they come across as rude and so on. But I don't see that. All I see is very useful direct communication, and I appreciate it because I can understand them that much easier. I don't lie. I'm quite poor at it. I can lie, I just don't do it because I'm just really bad at it. That's not to say that all autistic people don't lie. Some of us are really good at the ability to be able to deceive people. Some people become actors and actresses, or actors in general, and so on. So actually some of us are quite good at that, but I'm really bad at it and I get caught out if I do. So people are used to that. If they want to know the answer and then potentially not too worried about the answer not being what they want to hear, then they will ask me a question. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm pretty much, I'm sure from sort of friends and things, the same person in all situations, which I know can be difficult for some of us due to masking and so on. I have great organisation skills. Annette is always she's very self-deprecating, and she really shouldn't be because she's an amazing human being. I have great organisation skills. She feels she doesn't, but actually that works because she brings her creativity, I bring my organisation, and together we can do fantastic work supporting autistic people. I do have creative thinking in terms of thinking outside the box, but not in the way I imagine Annette with her creative abilities. And mine's more about seeing the patterns, I guess, in theories and so on, and coming up with something new. So yes, we all have challenges and strengths. So you don't have to answer now, but it's worth thinking about in terms of yourself and also the autistic people in your life. What challenges you in, as a person? What accommodations might you need? And then what strengths do you personally have that could be embraced by yourself and those around you? So let's have a quick look. Having a look in the comment section. I've missed so much. Hold on. Was there anything I need to grab? So as I love these talks, how do I get to live in a world where I can be allowed to be my autistic self? Hello, Coco. If you're still there, we do have social groups as well. We have a number of different groups. We have, and they're all for different sort of energy levels that you might have as an autistic person or interests. We have an arts group. We have a social group that meet twice a week online. We have an animals group, which is very low spoons. So that's not a peer support group. You're not allowed, if you like, to, ask for support. That's for, I don't have energy, I don't have spoons, but I want to look at cute things on my screen. So that's, and share my animals with other people. What else do we do? We have a brand new LGBTQIA group. Am I missing some? What am I missing? Oh, we've got an autistic caregivers group as well. These are all autistic only spaces. So our main platform, any neurological profile is allowed. You know, if you're non-autistic, you're allowed to, you know, and encouraged to come and learn from us on Aucademy. But the Aucademy groups are autistic only. So please do think about coming there, because what I talk about with Annette is that even if we only get to be our authentic selves as much as possible anyway, for say just 2 hours a week, because we meet up, whether online or offline, with other autistic people who just accept us for our way of communicating and so on, we see that that improves people's well-being. So I know it's not ideal, but it's certainly a start, and you will be so welcome if you want to pop over. And Coco also says, sorry, there's so much shame also for valid diverse folks. That's an interesting term. I'm not sure if I'm misreading that. So asking for a ramp for a wheelchair, for example, regular folks may say it is selfish to ask this. Okay. Oh, and Samara's asking about that infographic from Leeds. You can actually find it quite easily as well, but I'm sure we can post that. Let's have a look through. So sorry, just checking if there's any great comments that I need to answer. And Kelly, I've also experienced a really devastating difference between treatment based on my communication or function. People treat me with respect when I can use mouth words to explain my stimming or experiences, but when I cannot use mouth words, observably struggling, they treat me poorly and infantilise me. So I can only imagine what it's like for those who never communicate with mouth words. It's why educating non-autistics and prioritising acceptance is crucial. And I am desperately looking to be able to support any you know, non-traditionally speaking or alternate means, autistic people who use alternate means of communication, to come and educate for us on Aucademy, and that's down to me. I'm just working 7 days a week, and I'm trying to make sure that I would put a platform and a session in place for somebody who would be willing to come and educate on whatever it is they want to talk about. And I think importantly as well, whatever intersection of our community that we have on Aucademy, I want it to be that they are going to get to talk and teach about something that interests them, not specifically bringing them on to talk about, you know, the fact that they don't use mouth words and so on. I want it to, you know, if that's what they want to talk about, that's fantastic. But I want it to be us being able to bring on autistic people from so many diverse backgrounds to just teach about what they're interested in, right? So trying to not be tokenistic in why we're bringing them on. I hope that makes sense. Hello, Holly. Just had a crying meltdown in the street as a 40-something shortly before this live started, over trying to deal with a government agency and being surprised that I didn't have the right document. Yep, and it's it's really difficult for us, and I think to some extent not good you had a crying meltdown, but it's, you know, our bodies as autistic people, our brains as autistic people, it just does that because it's like that's how it's going to deal with it. You know, we can't hide that, and so I'm sorry that you had that difficult experience this afternoon, but so welcome to see you here. Just looking through the comments again. Oh, Coco's adding some more information as well about themselves. Fantastic. And something I'm interested in talking about is the Coco's just explaining that they started a blog called The Hipster Autist in Dutch. Fantastic, interesting. They're 37, same age as me. Just got the diagnosis, although I knew for 2 years, but just as Chloe is saying, my life went the same. And I think it's really interesting when we do realise, when we do discover, we do certainly have that experience of what I'm writing as a new piece of training, which is the 6 stages of autistic discovery. So it's very, very much loosely based on the 5 stages of grief. with a bonus stage at the end, which is the 6th stage of embracing your autistic identity. Because we go through those stages. We go through the denial, I'm definitely not autistic, that imposter syndrome, or we go through that bargaining. Okay, fine, I am autistic, but I'm not like those other autistic people, and moving through those different stages to embracing our autistic identity. And I think we all seem to, as autistic people, whatever stage, whatever age we are diagnosed or discovered as autistic people, seem to go through those different stages. And it would be nice if we can get everyone to that bonus stage of embracing their autistic self. Comments, let's have a look. Kind of makes them Coco cry a bit, because autism is not the problem. No, it's absolutely not. And that makes me really sad to hear some people that I've supported who blame autism. And I'm kind of like almost anthropomorphizing, so assigning sort of humanity, if you like, or a physical sense of autism as a person in of its own right, if you like, which I know is a bit strange. But I almost want, I say to those individuals, but it's not poor autism's fault. Autism didn't do anything wrong. We should actually be kinder to autism. Autism didn't do anything wrong. It really is the environment and the way society understands difference, or not understand or not accepting of difference at this point in time. And we should be kinder to autism, right? It's really not doing anything mean. And we should be more embracing of that. Like I say, almost want to create like a beautiful little creature called autism that we hug and love and try to be kinder to, because ultimately we're talking about ourselves, really. It is the world making other people, other in quotation marks, Coco's explained, people marginalised and the outcasts and weirdos, and behave like we're someone we're not. That is hard, as we all know. I hope to create the language for holistic people to understand our world in a way that they listen, hear us, and act upon it in the way we need it to, instead of the way they think we would maybe like it to be. Lovely, thank you. That's fantastic. I've never seen Coco as a name in our comment section before, so if you're new or just new to commenting, hello, so lovely to hear from you. Okay, I think everyone has been helping chat and put in some explanations of what some of our groups are called. Kerry, don't have the spoons to answer those questions. Ultimately, it comes down to working with holistic professionals that have no idea how ableist, roddering and trauma invoking they are in their treatment, and even just language when working with attempting to support autistic people. Kerry, I'm on the pathway of a 2-year waiting list, have strengths again of strong ability to stand up for injustice, but living in a world of people that don't get it. I'd say my downfall or challenge per se is rejection and fawning, meeting everyone else's needs but neglecting my own because I can't stand being disliked, but then unable to ignore injustice. It's a big cycle. And rejection sensitivity is, it's quite strong for a number of autistic people, particularly if you've got attention differences as well. Oh, Samara, like him. I want to create a beautiful little creature called autism. But I don't also want people to get the wrong idea. I'm not trying to make autism out to be this little monster or something, but just this idea of this beautiful, just so that we're kinder, because sometimes we're not kind to ourselves. And Annette's mantra for a lot of people when we support them is we need to be kinder to ourselves, but we really struggle to do that. So maybe it helps if we kind of make it a little bit more abstract and talk about autism as if they are this lovely creature that needs love and attention and just, embracing and so on. Maybe that would be easier for people to be more considerate to themselves. So if anyone's really good at art, feel free to make something beautiful that needs kindness, called autism, for instance. But I'm very wary. I don't want us to separate this idea that we are a person with autism either. But it's more about it's actually how can we be kinder to ourselves when we really struggle to do that. Lovely, fantastic. Talking to people. That was a little bit shorter than 45 minutes, but not much. I'm really bad at bite-sized stuff. I'm really trying. But thank you so much for popping on, lovely people, and hopefully we'll see you at 7 o'clock later with Jodie, is it, and Tigger, where we will be talking about the demand avoidant profile of autistic people who experience that anyway. So lovely. Thanks, everybody. See you later. Oh, I forgot to say, next bite size, the humanizing language of autistic culture. Okay, bye everyone.